Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Mitko Karshovski, and welcome to episode 82 of That Remote Life podcast, where we hear from location-independent entrepreneurs and professionals so you can learn to quit the cubicle and live life on your terms. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Esther Jacobs, who is one of the most impressive people I've had the pleasure of meeting. In the early 2000s, Esther started a nonprofit organization which helped raise over 16 million euros for charity. She's one of the youngest people to be knighted in the Netherlands, has published over 30 books, and for the last couple of years, she has made quite a bit of news because the Dutch government, the government that knighted her a few years prior, actually renounced her citizenship for being a digital nomad. During this interview, Esther shared the story of how all of this happened, what led the Dutch government to actually renounce her citizenship, why she decided to stand her ground and fight for the rights of nomads when she actually had some opportunities to kind of slip through the cracks and actually get her citizenship reinstated, but she decided to use her profile in the Netherlands to actually highlight these issues. And we also discuss where she sees the future of the relationship between global citizens and digital nomads and countries and governments is headed, how governments should handle global citizens who don't necessarily fit into the boxes as easily as regular citizens. But before we jump into this interview, I do have a new 5-star review to share with you guys. And this one is from Slappy ZSGH, who says, remote work and business is the future of our working world. Mitko is on a hot topic here and something that really helps people break out of their normal routines to see a new way of life. Thank you so much, Slappy, for that review. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that you are enjoying the podcast. If you're listening, please head over to your favorite podcasting app and leave us a review. Or if you would rather share this podcast with a friend, send them a text and say, hey, I think that you would really love this podcast, and send it over to them. I would greatly appreciate that. It's always good to bring in new listeners. But all right, you guys, I won't wait off any longer. This is an amazing interview. I love talking with Esther. She's so impressive and has quite an amazing story to share with you guys. So without further ado, let's dive into this awesome podcast episode with Esther Jacobs. All right. Well, Esther, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I am super excited to talk to you, and I was doing, research for this episode, and I went to your website, as I do for every guest. And you know how everybody on their websites has that as seen in, like little bar on the website. And I'm always used to seeing, like Forbes, New York Times, maybe something like this. And then I noticed that on yours, you have Survivor. And I've never seen that before anywhere else. And then I dug in deeper and I found out that you were on a European version of Survivor. Did I mess something up there, or is that true?
No, it's true. It's true. I survived for 3.5 weeks on an uninhabited island in Malaysia for the European Survivor show. It's been a while ago, but I still vividly remember. Yeah.
So, okay, we need to touch on this a little bit because I just found out about a month and a half ago that my fiance has never seen Survivor. And so we started watching like the original Survivors, like the first seasons. Why did you decide that that was something you wanted to do? And like, what was the process to get onto Survivor?
Well, it wasn't that I actually wanted to participate in Survivor. It was more that I was trying to get away from the situation I was in. I had collected 16 million euros for charities in the Netherlands. And then I found out that those charities didn't want to share how they spent that money. So for 7 years altogether, I was in the charity world trying to promote transparency, while most of the charities didn't want me there. So it was very, very difficult. And I was tired and almost depressed. And I just wanted to get away. So one day I was driving away from a charity conference. And in the car, there was this radio announcement. This is the last day to apply for Survivor. And I was like, 2 months of an uninhabited island of no emails, no charities, and I just applied. And because I was quite well known at that time in the Netherlands because of this charity collection. I think I stood out in all the thousands of applications, and I got invited for an interview. And of course, the interviews, you have to fill out 25 pages of information, and you have to stand out as well. And um, I was very honest. So when they asked me, okay, so if you're in a group of people and you find some food, how are you gonna go about, dividing the food? And I'm like, I'm not a people's person, and I eat every 2 hours. So I think by the time I find a mango, I think I will have eaten it, during the discussion of how we're gonna share it. And they looked at me like, because I think everybody gives socially acceptable answers, and they're looking
Uh-huh.
for people who will make um, like drama or discussion.
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and I didn't think about it. I didn't want to join Survivor. I just wanted to get away, and I was very honest. But before I knew it, I was flown to Malaysia to be actually, normally Survivor, for people who know, are two groups on two islands, and then they have to vote off people. They have to do contests to win food, to gain immunity, whatever. So it's those two groups of people. But every year there is a surprise, something hidden. And in my year, they hid two people in a cave, and that was me and somebody else. So for 2 weeks, I was hidden in this cave without meeting any other participants, without food, without contests, without anything. And the others didn't know that we were there. So when we were finally presented, the rest didn't want to accept us. And then they used that situation to create, people to leave their comfort zone, because friendships have been formed. You kind of know where you
Mm-hmm.
stand. They changed all the rules. They mixed up all the groups. They made us leaders, put us on a platform with a medallion around our neck and a flag in our hand, and said that, they couldn't vote us off. We had immunity. So my group was just infuriated with all these changes, and they projected it onto me. They didn't want to meet me. They didn't want to shake my hand. They didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to share their food with me. So it was war from the beginning. And that was exactly what the production wanted. But for me, it was like, hey, I've just been in a cave for 2 weeks. I
Right.
just want to say
Take
hello.
it
Where have
easy.
you been? What have you done? And actually, looking back, it was exactly what happened in the charity world. I was
Mm.
very naive. I was bringing money, saying, hey guys, look, I've got all this money for you. And people didn't want me. They felt threatened. They felt like they couldn't control me. Where does this girl come from? She doesn't want a career in our world. We have no strings to pull. And exactly the same thing happened on Survivor. So I thought I was getting away from it. And on an uninhabited island, I experienced the same thing as in the charity world. And that's where I learned that, you always take yourself with you wherever you go. And the same patterns will play in your work, in your relationships. And so ever since, I even used the Survivor experience in my, TEDx presentations, keynote speeches, the books that I write, because it's such an interesting view on humanity, on group behavior, on personal development. So all in all, it's been an interesting experience, but I wouldn't really repeat it.
You obviously had a pretty intense experience. I think even for like a regular survivor experience, it sounded like you had a much more intense experience of that. So was that kind of like the key lesson that you walked away from it and that you've brought back into your life, is sort of these like really understanding and having been through very difficult like people kind of situations? Like what is the thing that you feel like you've walked away with the most from there?
I think that what I already knew is that I'm pretty solid as a person. Like, I'm not insecure, or
Mm,
I just know who I am and what I can do. But this experience confirmed that to a degree that I wasn't even aware of. Because why did people get so unsettled by me? Is because I was just being me. And apparently everybody plays a role in those things, these
shows,
reality
yeah.
shows. And that's also what the production stimulates. So the production couldn't believe that I stayed in this situation. And every day They talked to me and they pretended to be nice, like, "Hey, Esther, how are you doing? How are you coping? Do you think you can last another day? You're so lonely. Everybody's against you." And I was like, "Well, I hate this situation. I feel very lonely, but I'm just hoping that somebody will see the light today and that things will change." And while they pretended to be caring, the moment I said that, they stood up, they walked away with the walkie-talkie, said, "Yes, we're on. The show can go on. She's going through another day." And so I realized that the only person I could rely on was myself. I was very, very lonely, but I knew the reactions of the other people were unfair and unjust. Even though everybody was saying that I was wrong, I felt that I wasn't, and that it wasn't fair what was happening.
Mm. You mentioned that the reason that why you wanted to go on Survivor was because you were running this charity, and that was called Coins for Care. Can you talk a little bit about what that was? Because it sounds like a pretty interesting kind of charity to run. And how did that lead you to become location independent and sort of join the quote unquote digital nomad movement?
Well, actually, the digital nomad thing already happened before. Ever since I was like 17, I've been traveling by myself without a plan, without a lot of budget, and just, before it was digital and before it was popular, I was already doing this. And actually, for this charity project, I stopped traveling for a while because
Mm,
when the euro was introduced in the Netherlands in 2002, I realized that we all, as frequent travelers in Europe, we all have this reserve of foreign coins that normally you think you'll bring to Germany next year or to France next year, and you always forget, but there'll be another year. And with the introduction of the euro, we couldn't do that anymore. So I realized people had coins, paper money they could exchange for euros, but coins they couldn't. So um, I thought, if I collect all these leftover worthless coins for charity, then people have a reason to give it away. And I can, maybe, if you cannot exchange a handful of coins, but a truck full of coins, for charity, they will have to accept. So that's how it started. And of course, it was very difficult. I had no experience. I didn't know anybody. Nobody knew me. It was before the internet. So everything had to be done by fax and letters and whatever. It was really complicated. And but in the end, it's a long story. But in the end, I did get like 4,000 locations in the Netherlands, like banks, supermarkets, gas stations, where I could put boxes where money was collected. And I had 1,000 volunteers that would empty those boxes and take it to 150 collection points. And then there was a company in England who hand sorted all this money and took it back to the country of origin in exchange for euros. And altogether, that resulted in 16 million euros.
wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm pretty proud of what I've done, considering the circumstances, and making no expenses. Everything went to charity. And I even got knighted by the Dutch Queen for this. I was one of the youngest people ever to be knighted. The other young people were like Olympic gold medalists, and I was just, a girl next door who did something for charity. But yeah, it was a huge experience, also very difficult, and also, like I said, the charities didn't want me around because I did everything different and faster and cheaper than they did. So instead of being happy with the money that I brought them, they were kind of resisting and trying to stop me. And it was so disappointing and depressing that I just wanted to get away after all these years. And that's where I ended
Mm.
up on the Survivor Island.
The reason why I wanted to talk to you for this podcast, and that people haven't really heard this yet, but you were actually kind of, if I can say it this way, kicked out of the Netherlands. They kind of didn't want you as a citizen anymore. You started this amazing charity, raised all of this money, and on top of that, you've been knighted by a country. How do you go from being knighted in one country to then that same country kind of saying like you're not a citizen anymore? Because this is really important for a lot of people that, and like I've been talking about this a lot recently, like I mentioned before we kind of hit record, is that you need to have backups. And people, I'd never heard of that happening to somebody before. What happened to you? So how did you go from, being knighted by the Netherlands to then kind of like not really being recognized as a citizen by the Netherlands anymore?
Yeah, that was a big surprise for me as well. There were like 10 years in between, but I was living in the same city that I was knighted in by the mayor, by the queen. And I was an honorary citizen, and I traveled a lot because after the charity project stopped, I resumed traveling again. So I spent quite a fair amount of time outside of the Netherlands. I own a home there. I paid taxes. I was insured. I had bank accounts, everything. And one day I just went to the city hall to renew my passport, like all the other years before. And they told me, excuse me, we cannot renew your passport because you don't live here anymore. And I was like, that must be a mistake, tell me what's going on and then we can set this straight. And said, no, we cannot show you your file because it's privacy protected. And I'm like, it's my privacy,
It's your file, right?
my file, but they wouldn't show it to me. So I had to wait for people to contact me and they didn't. And there was like an investigation going on against me. And they put a fraud team on me. But I'm like, fraud, that's when you don't pay taxes or you take money illegally. And I was paying taxes. I had my own home. I was an entrepreneur. Everything was legal. But later I found out that when you're an exception, they don't have a box or a team for exceptions. They only have a team for fraud. So they put me in the fraud team. And then the whole machine
Mm.
goes off, with home visits, with checking everything. All your accounts are frozen. And basically, what I found out much, much later is that there is a law in the Netherlands, and most countries have a law like this, that if you spend less than 4 months or 6 months in some countries in one location, then you cannot be registered there because they assume that you live somewhere else. So even though I could
Oh.
prove that this house in the Netherlands was my fixed base, that I kept my stuff there, I traveled, I always came back there, I didn't live anywhere else, they wouldn't accept it because they said this is the law. So I tried to reason with them. It wouldn't work. It became like really, really big. I didn't have a passport anymore. I couldn't travel. I couldn't
Hmm.
visit my father for Christmas. So I put some pressure on them. And because I knew so many journalists from the charity time, I informed them. And they started questioning, the mayor and posting in front of the town hall. And the city was really not happy with me. And at one point, I wrote a blog about my situation and I published it on Sunday night. And on Monday morning, the next Monday morning, the ministers were asking questions in the government about my situation. So for 3 weeks, they had meetings on my case. And their conclusion was that this law of this 4 months was not really meant for people like me. But technically, the city had applied it correctly. So there was nothing they could do for me. And at that point, I got deregistered from my own house in this city. And in Holland and in most countries, the registration of everything is tied to your permanent residence address. When you
Hmm.
don't have a permanent residence address, everything collapses. So I lost my pension, my voting rights, my health insurance, my bank accounts, my company got deregistered from the Chamber of Commerce, my phone plan got cancelled, everything collapsed and there was nowhere I could go. There was not like a higher office or a window or wherever because the ministers had already decided. And in the whole country, there was only one organization that kept saying, Miss Jacobs, to us you are and will always be a cherished citizen of the Netherlands.
Oh, was
And
the
that was
taxes?
the taxes. You're right. So they wanted me to pay taxes, even though I had lost all my rights to social security, to voting, to anything. And it took 3 years to finally come to a settlement with the taxes. So now I officially don't pay taxes anywhere and I officially don't live anywhere. And I think I may be one of the very few recognized non existent people.
So hold on. So what do you, because this is the part about your story that really kind of confuses me, because you were deregistered by, your country, even though they said, like, we understand that this is not about you, but they kind of, like, said, oh well, we'll pass it on to maybe like the next people to deal with your case. So how did you, obviously you're now able to travel, you've been traveling since then, how did you kind of solve this and set yourself up as in, like, how did you get passports again, that kind of stuff?
Well, there's a lot of steps that you have to take. Like even now, still like 6 years later, every month or every 2 months, I run into something that doesn't work anymore and that I have to solve. But the first thing was my passport, and I found out there is a window in The Hague in the Netherlands for homeless people, and I can apply for a passport there, even though I even own a few apartments now, and I have a business and whatever, but I have to go to a window for homeless people to get a new passport. I lost my driver's license, and it took me like months to find out how I could get a new driver's license, how I could keep my bank accounts, how I could get a phone plan, health insurance, also a big thing. I was uninsured for a while, and I got into a car accident in the Caribbean. And then I realized how important health insurance was. So I kept looking and looking for solutions, and expat health insurances don't cover because they keep asking, to what country are you transferred, and I don't have another country. So I was in Mallorca in Spain, where I spent some time in the IKEA. And in the IKEA family section, there was a big flyer talking about health insurance. And in the end, I got health insurance in IKEA family Mallorca, which covers me worldwide and which is even cheaper than most of the private health insurances that most people have.
Wait, so IKEA has their own health insurance?
No, it's IKEA family, and then only on the Spanish islands, not on the mainland. So it's really, really, really like
But it's
restricted.
like a product of IKEA.
No, it's actually Mafre. It's a big insurer, and they kind of, I don't know, licensed it or branded it IKEA family. So in IKEA, you can get this insurance, and it's, I think, 72 euros per month with worldwide coverage.
Wow.
So step by step, I found solutions for everything. But once you have a solution for one thing, the next thing is falling apart. So it's definitely not easy. My goal has never been to avoid taxes. I was happy to pay taxes and to have this, this structure with pension, with social security, with just some foundations that everybody has and kind of takes for granted. But I wasn't allowed to stay registered. And there has even been a committee commissioned by the ministry in the Netherlands to research this problem of digital nomads and if there is a solution. And there was a very easy solution to have people register on a digital street. So if I want to stay registered in the Netherlands, I could register myself on digital street number one, and then I would pay taxes. I would be, people could find me. I would be registered. I would be a citizen in the Netherlands without an actual street. But the ministry that had actually commissioned this research then took distance from it and said, no, 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 we're not going to do it. So they don't want a solution. They want the problem to go away. And we all know that the number of people becoming location independent gets bigger and bigger. So that puts some other countries in the spotlight, like Estonia, who's providing services for people like us, and more and more countries are like inventing digital nomad visa now. And so I think countries that react positively to this will have a lot of benefit from it, and countries like the Netherlands that have always been exploring countries now suddenly are very conservative in this area. And I hear regularly from journalists and people working for the ministry that I'm still a headache dossier. Whenever my name is mentioned, they go like, "Oh, please, no." So now, both in the charity industry and in the Dutch government, I'm like a no-go area. Even though I've done nothing wrong, I'm just trying to change things for the better, make things more transparent, help to see opportunities and seize opportunities that this new world offers. but not everybody is open to that. And I think that's also a reality that we have to cope with, and not try to focus on the things that don't work, but try to focus on the things and the people that do want to move forward. And that's something that I keep telling myself, because you can get easily frustrated and burnt out when you keep focusing on the things that don't work. But I'm always here when some ministry, wants my help with, as like the wild card. They put me in all kinds of brainstorm teams and think tanks. I'm always there. I'm always willing to contribute. And I don't have any hard feelings, but I keep communicating my story because I think it's important, that governments and people know what could happen. And there's a lot of ways around this, to register somewhere else, secret, whatever. But I thought, since I'm in the spotlight anyway, let's make it very transparent. And I said, okay, if you say I cannot live here, then tell me what to do. Where should I register? What should I do?
Hmm.
And nobody can tell me. And I keep asking that question because I know there needs to be a solution for future digital nomads. Those boundaries that we have, the borders that we have, are artificial.
Hmm.
You see them on a map, but in reality, you don't see them. And the more fluid our world becomes with internet and cheap plane tickets and the same currencies, like we have the euro now, the more fluid these boundaries become. And young people don't even realize, everybody speaks English. And what is the difference between somebody living 5 kilometers from a border on one side and 5 kilometers on the other side? Why are there different laws? Why, are they not allowed to cross? Why do they have different currencies? It's not realistic anymore because travel is so easy and frequent. Of course, now during COVID, it's a little bit different, but it's, there are no boundaries. Why do we create boundaries instead of seeing opportunities and trying to make things better?
Yeah, I think that has I kind of it's kind of similar to like large corporations to startups, is like these large businesses, they might see like a small like subset of people that are not really interesting to them because they have such bigger issues to like deal with. But smaller countries function a lot more like startups, and like, you mentioned Estonia that.
Flexible, innovative,
Mhm.
not resisting to change, but seeing it as an opportunity. I think that's big things. Yeah. And you see bigger companies also starting to disappear. They're having really difficult times. And the foundations that they were built on, and that those registration systems were built on, were very valid, a few decades ago, because
Mhm.
everything was location based and everything was size based and everything was growth oriented. But times are changing, and nowadays a small foundation and flexibility and innovation are more important. And you also see a lot of startups and people move forward with plans that are not complete yet, because you cannot wait until something is perfect. You just have to move
Mhm.
and keep moving and adapt while you're moving, because nothing is going to going to slow down again. It's only going to go faster.
So, people listening might be a little bit confused or frightened at this point because your story doesn't sound very different from my own story or a lot of other people's stories. So, how come? Like, why did this happen to you, but it hasn't happened to so many other people who are digital nomads and are maybe U.S. citizens, but don't really spend a lot of time in the U.S.?
Well, every country has different rules, but I found out that a lot of people, when they go travel, they just register with their parents or friends or neighbors, whatever. And most of the time, the government never finds out. And I think it's fine if you do that, but some people also get like a social security and then they travel with that. That's not really fair to society. I think if you, especially if you live outside of the system, you have to make sure that you don't just take something from a society. You have to or be equal or contribute to it. um, but I think if you travel and you register somewhere and you don't take any social security or whatever, chances are very small that they'll find out. What happened to me is I had my mail forwarded by mail with a sticker. And I found out in Holland and many other countries, if you have a letter from the tax service or from the government and you want to forward it, the mail service doesn't forward it, but they send it back to the tax service or the government.
Mm.
And that's where the exception slash fraud thing starts. They don't think, hey, what could be happening? Let's contact Esther. They think fraud, and they start this whole thing
Hmm.
that the machine that you can't stop.
So you almost raised the red flag for them and they caught you. You might have kind of been able to, you know, go under the radar for them had that not happened.
True. And then afterwards, I could have stopped this whole thing by going under the radar. Like there's even many majors of different cities in the Netherlands that offered me that I could register in their city. But I was like, but I wouldn't spend 4 months a year there. So then legally, I would be committing fraud. So while this is in the open, let's see if there is a legal solution for people like me. So I willingly made my life more difficult by being in the spotlights because I thought many people cannot do it. And because they're afraid to lose, their whatever, their house, their job, their registration, and there's no alternative. And for me, the world is my playground. So I found solutions
Mm,
for everything. I registered my company in the British Virgin Islands. Estonia didn't exist then. Otherwise, I would have registered in Estonia. But because I was spending a lot of time in the Caribbean, the BVI was logical for me. I got my health insurance, my passport, so everything solved itself. And even I turned this challenge into an opportunity because when I traveled, I rented out my house sometimes, and that's how they caught me because the renters forwarded my mail.
mm,
But then when I said, okay, then, if you won't let me back in the country, then I'll just, move out completely. I rented out my house permanently. Later, I sold my house. With that money, I could buy some more small apartments in Amsterdam that I'm now renting out. So basically, I want to thank, the city that kicked me out, that fired me, because of that now I have a business model. I have some passive income. I have a life that's even more free than ever because I don't have to do any administration, any registration anywhere. I'm as free as I can be, and I discovered a new business model in real estate.
mm,
So you could be frustrated and feel like a victim and try to blame the people that caused it, but in the end, if you wait long enough, you turn things around, you can see the benefits. And I really see that this is an opportunity that they offer to me without knowing it. And right now I help other people to find a way to be location independent and not to get stuck in the system, especially in the Netherlands, but a lot of countries have similar rules.
mhm. Where do you see, obviously you're very involved on this topic and trying to force governments to kind of recognize us as, citizens that they need to figure out how to work with. Where do you see this going in the next 10 years? Obviously, COVID has really accelerated the adoption of remote work. And with that, I think there will be more and more people who decide that, hey, I'm working remotely now. I don't even have to be here. I can be, in another place. So I think the number of digital nomads and location independent people are going to rise as well. Where do you think this goes in the next 10 years? Like, what are kind of like, what's the light at the end of the tunnel maybe you're seeing or not seeing that governments are starting to recognize? Just where do you see that going?
Well, I think it's gonna take a while because even now with remote work, everybody is like, okay, this is temporary. And if you ask a big company, they start talking about, yeah, but if our employee works from Indonesia, then we have tax laws and we have responsibility and liability and whatever. It's only going to be temporary because this is not a sustainable model. So they keep putting barriers, but that's what always happens with change, right? The conservative parties or the bigger parties, the traditional parties, they only see problems. But this is a movement that cannot be stopped. Even before COVID, if you work remote in Amsterdam and you have to rent an expensive apartment, and you can work from home, then you can also work from a co-working space, and then you can also work from Berlin or from South America or from Thailand with a lot less expenses. And then people say, oh, it's not fair, the competition, the digital nomads, whatever. Well, you can try protect your market, you can try protect the old fashioned system, but if you look at it from a world perspective, things are going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better to be prepared for it by experiencing remote work now while you're maybe still employed or while the world is still confused, and then see opportunities and set yourself up for the future, because this is the future. Whether travel will be restricted or not, you can do global, how do you say, geo arbitrage. You can
Mm-hmm.
make your money in one place and spend it in another place. You can register in one place and live in another place. You can have your company in one place and your taxes in another place. So you can pick and choose what works best for you. And countries that move quickly and offer interesting options will be the countries that attract more digital nomads. And they're not just hippies with a laptop. There's also like real entrepreneurs with real businesses, and real money that will contribute in the form of taxes or knowledge to the countries that they settle in.
What are
So I
some of the
think it's an
countries?
opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. Like, I saw this article recently that said that when the car came out, there were all these laws that tried to actually make it really difficult for the car industry to take off. Like, there are all these like people who are protesting the car because it's going to be so dangerous and so loud and that kind of stuff.
Scared
And
of
I feel like
horses.
right. And so I feel like we're in that part of remote work where everybody
Yeah.
else is like, no, this is gonna be too difficult. There's too many issues and that kind of stuff. But eventually, just like the car, I think is gonna take over. What countries do you think are doing a good job so far of, like you said, being nimble and kind of instead of trying to like squash these new issues that are popping up, kind of like embracing them and rolling with them?
Well, the most famous one is Estonia, of course. They're really advanced. They just launched a digital nomad visa as well, so people from outside of Europe can register in Estonia, and then they have access to Europe for a year, which is brilliant. And now during COVID, I've heard of a few Caribbean countries that have also they're
Barbados.
also looking. Yeah, Barbados, Curacao is looking into it, and there's some other places. But so far, I think Estonia is the most advanced because everything is digital. Those other countries require you to actually visit the country, which is also an advantage because then they have money coming in, of course. And I know there's some other countries that are investigating these things, and yeah, something will happen. But of course, now the priority is not there, which also means that if you do move quickly as a country, that you're really standing out.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think this is an invitation for maybe the younger, smaller, more digital countries to look into this issue and to offer solutions. Think about it: a digital nomad will that registers their company somewhere will spend money on registration or on accountancy fees. If they actually visit the country, they may, they go to co-working spaces, they rent a place to stay, they maybe hire people, they go out to eat. There's an influx of money and brain power because they connect to like-minded people, and new initiatives may start.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes down to these things, and I think that most countries are going to wait until the last possible moment to kind of like make these things happen. But I am very excited about the countries that are smaller, that are nimbler, like Estonia, that is kind of seeing the future written on the walls and is taking action now. Before we kind of wrap up, for people that are listening that aren't already immensely impressed by you, having raised so much money for charity and being knighted in the Netherlands. You're also a big time author. You've published over 30 books, which is crazy. What are you working on at the moment? And you've mentioned your business several times. What is your business today that people can check out if they're interested?
Well, I actually, after the charity project, I became a speaker. I was asked to talk about not only charity, but how to get big results with limited resources. And I gave over 1,000 keynote speeches and two TEDx speeches. And more people started to ask about my personal experiences. So, what choices did you make? How did you realize your dream? How do you achieve the results? So, I started writing books. And my central theme is no excuses. They call me the no
Mm,
excuses lady. And my first book was called What is Your Excuse? So, I wrote about that. I wrote about how to live your dream, digital nomads, a handbook for world citizens, but also about relationship with Mr. Wrong, which is also a growth opportunity. You know, you can point at this person or this government or whatever, but you always have a choice whether you want to step into a story or whether you want to step out, and it's better to, you know, to take control and to learn something. So that's the central theme in everything I do. And what I notice when I'm good at something, I get more and more questions from people like, how do you live your dream? How do you write a book? How do you turn your passion into a business? So whenever I get more than 10 questions, I just organize a workshop or something, or I write a book about it and then workshops or retreats. So I don't have a business plan or a business model. I just listen very well to what's going on in the world around me and the questions that I get. And the last few years, I've been helping people to write their book in 1 week. I organize writing retreats in Mallorca, in Curacao, in the Caribbean, and in Thailand. And I already wrote a small guide about how to write your book, but now I'm just publishing my real book. This is how you write a book, with all the examples and tips and experiences. And I've just recorded an e-course about that as well. So writing your book is really one of the main things, because whatever you do, whether you want to become a speaker, whether you're in charity, whether you're an entrepreneur, you always need to communicate. And a book gives you the authority as an expert. It also helps you to summarize your knowledge. You leave like a legacy, and it can be the basis for a speech, for an e-course, for training, for presentation, whatever. So and it's something I love doing, because when it's your own story, for many people it's difficult to share. You know, how do you, all this knowledge you have, all these experiences, how do you capture it?
Mm,
So that's one of the main things I do. And the other thing is I help people to become location independent, and then especially Dutch people who, you know, want to know how to get out of the system or who have problems with the system, but also how to become an entrepreneur. And it's also seeing and seizing opportunities.
mm,
So, for example, I found a cheap cruise a few years ago, and I organized an inspiration cruise. I had 15 entrepreneurs who joined on a crossing from Spain to Brazil. And it turned out it was the same boat as the first Nomad cruise. So all these nomads had paid and signed up for the Nomad cruise, and I actually got paid by the people who joined me on that cruise. And then I had to spend the winter in South America. And on the way back, I did the same thing. Again, I had 15 entrepreneurs. And since now cruising is probably not going to happen for a while, I thought, what is another thing that I would like to do? And one of the things on my wish list is to walk the Cinque Terre, the five mountain villages in Italy. So I just posted on Facebook, if I go do this walk, who wants to join me? And I called it Walk Your Business instead of Cruise Your Business. And I got like 60 people who are interested. So I think in April next year, I'll organize a walk your business trip to Italy. And just for fun, I recently bought a piece of olive orchard in South Italy, just because I, you know, as a person without roots, I like the idea of having some land and some olive trees. And now I have so many people interested in experiencing this life that I'm probably going to do kind of a crowdfunding thing to build like a tiny house on it, and then I can rent it out to people. I can organize events there. So whatever happens to me, I just do what I want to do. I follow my
mm,
passion and I communicate about it. This visibility is very important. And then people who are interested in the same thing will connect, and something may emerge from that. And it
mm,
may not, but then I'm still doing what I want to do. So it's a very different idea of writing a business plan and, you know, going
mm.
for it, and nobody may be interested in it. I do what I want to do. I communicated about it, and most of the time people join and I add value, and, you know, together they connect, and it's a win-win-win situation, and that's what I'm always looking for.
Yeah, I think that's like the really amazing thing about the internet is that if you're interested in something, there's probably going to be other people interested in it as well. So you can truly like, this idea of like the passion business, that you can be really interested in something and build a business around it. And there will likely be other people that will join you on that. Um, But in wrapping up, Esther, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming onto the podcast. I'm going to have links to everything that you mentioned on the website. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And all the best. And I will have like I said, a link to your website in the podcast show notes. Esther, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was really nice. Thanks.